Like what you see here? Then be sure to subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8, a channel devoted to the history of college football. New videos drop twice a week. Click the card in the upper right corner or the link in the description to subscribe now. And now, on with our feature presentation.
The player to be named later. You've all seen trades like this before in baseball, where two teams make a trade, and included in the trade is a player to be named later, where one team has 6 months after the trade closes to agree on who they want, even though they don't have to decide right now. In other words, a trade could be made in July, and we don't know the full details of who or what is coming back to that team until December. Now, the player to be named later is not somebody completely random, and the process, even if it might seem funny and bizarre on paper, is pretty straightforward. It's not as though I can make a trade with the Angels for a player to be named later, and then decide I want that player to be Mike Trout. There's a list of guys that are agreed upon when the trade is made, and that team gets to choose from one of the guys on the list. Most of the time, this process is completely painless and drama-free. And then, there's the case of the Arizona Diamondbacks and the Florida Marlins with the trade involving this man right here, the centerpiece of the trade, pitcher Matt Mantei. In 1999, the Diamondbacks, looking to improve their bullpen, looked at one of the top relievers in the game, and as part of the trade, they included a player to be named later that would get sent to the Marlins. However, this trade turned out to be so controversial that the commissioner of baseball himself, Bud Selig, had to get involved, because the Marlins wanted one player, and the Diamondbacks absolutely refused to let him be the player to be named later in the trade. It's a bizarre trade that more than 2 decades later deserves a deep dive. Because this is the story behind what might just be, considering the circumstances, the strangest trade in the over 25-year history of the Arizona Diamondbacks franchise. Before I talk about the controversy of the trade involving Matt Mantei, as in this guy right here that you've been watching this whole time, we need some context to understand why the trade was made, who it was for, and how the trade was supposed to go. The year is 1999, and as we're just past the halfway point of the season, on July 8th, the Arizona Diamondbacks, as in an expansion team that just began play in 1998, were legitimately good and were making a push for the playoffs. It was insanely surprising, seeing as a bunch of expansion teams, including the Tampa Bay Devil Rays, who came in during the same year, struggled right away, and take some time to find their footing. However, the dbacks, in just their second season, were hitting the ground running. Through their first 86 games, they were 47-39, only 1.5 games back of the San Francisco Giants for the lead in the NL West, and right in the thick of things alongside a bunch of other teams, like the Houston Astros and the New York Mets, for the wild card, if things couldn't work out for the division. And with the Diamondbacks looking good, and with the trade deadline approaching, they were going into the deadline as buyers. And what did the Diamondbacks need more than anything else? They needed a closer, badly. If you can find a really good closer out there, that makes you that much better. Just ask the New York Yankees and the San Diego Padres, the two teams that played in the previous year's World Series in 1998, thanks to the play of Mariano Rivera and Trevor Hoffman, how important a dominant closer is. The Diamondbacks were a good team, but they didn't have that guy. Their top closer was Greg Olson, and he was insanely shaky. In 17 save opportunities through this point in the season, he blew 6 of them. A reliever that's converting less than 65% of his save opportunities is not exactly a guy you can rely on. For some perspective, that same season, Mariano Rivera had 49 save opportunities and converted 45 of them, or 92%. Obviously, not everyone can be Mariano, who's the greatest closer who ever lived. But it goes to show you the gap between the top and the bottom, where Olson was. He was averaging less than a strikeout per inning, which isn't a death sentence by any means. But when you're allowing more than 1 hit per inning, giving up 32 hits in just over 28 innings of work. And when you've got an ERA approaching 5, yeah, that's not good. At one point during the 1999 season, Olsen had not one, not two, but 3 straight appearances where he was called in for relief duty and blew the save. The D-backs needed a closer. That was the missing piece. So they turned to the man that you've been watching this whole time. None other than Matt Mantei. He was having a very good season thus far in Florida, striking out 50 batters in 36 innings of work, posting a sub-3 ERA with a batting average against of just 186, which was miles better than what Greg Olsen was doing, and converted 10 out of a possible 12 save opportunities. Part of the trade was that the Marlins were having a fire sale thanks to cheap ownership wanting to dismantle the team that won the 1997 World Series. And part of it was the fact that Mantei was eligible for arbitration at the end of the season, with his contract ready to expire. So you might as well get something for him if you have concern about not paying him. Then again, the Marlins insisted that this trade wasn't done for financial reasons, and was about building for the future. So you decide who you want to believe, especially since GM Dave Dombrowski said, "We're not going to have anybody who closes a game as well as Matt Mantei right now." But to be honest, we don't get there very often. Nice way of saying we suck. However, as part of the trade, the Marlins got 3 players. One of them was pitcher Vladimir Nunez, who was one of the first 2 players ever signed by the D-backs, and was pretty good for Arizona in 1999 in a middle relief role, posting a 2.91 ERA in 34 innings. One of them was their 5th-round pick from the 1996 MLB draft, who was still in the minors by this point. Some pitcher named Brad Penny. Don't know what happened to him. Probably nothing. And the other was, you guessed it, the player to be named later. Now, the good news for Arizona is that Mantei was just what the team needed. He was so good that he even got some MVP votes that season. Whereas the D-backs bullpen was nothing short of atrocious at closing games before his arrival, once Mantei came in and established himself as the clear-cut closer, everything turned around immediately. In 29 innings of work, he struck out an incredible 48 batters, or an average of 15.2 strikeouts per 9 innings. He had a sub-3 ERA, a batting average against of 192, converted 22 out of a possible 25 save opportunities, or 88%, compared to Greg Olsen's conversion rate below 65%. And thanks to him, the D-backs ended up going 162 and winning the NL West, winning their first division title in franchise history. There's a reason that they called him the Iceman, because he put games on ice. The regret with Mantei was that he couldn't stay healthy and he constantly found himself on the DL. But in terms of his ability to play, and in terms of providing Arizona exactly what they needed at the time, the trade worked out short term. The bad news was the 3rd player in the trade after Nunez and Penny, as in, the player to be named later. Initially, the Marlins were given a list of 2 players to choose from, and they could decide after the season which one they wanted to complete the trade for the man that you've been watching, Matt Mantei. Option 1 was right-handed pitcher Jason Boyd, who was a pitcher in AAA with the D-backs team in Tucson. The only problem with him? He was a player to be named later in an earlier trade with the Pittsburgh Pirates, as at the start of the 1999 season, the D-backs acquired shortstop and stolen base machine Tony Womack for a player to be named later. The Pirates chose him in August, 1 month after the Mantei trade, to complete the Womack trade, so he was now off the table for the Marlins for obvious reasons. Why they included him in 2 separate trades, I have no clue. Option 2 was another right-handed pitcher, Steven Randolph. Randolph had some good numbers, posting a 2.64 ERA in AA at El Paso and a 3.66 ERA in AAA, so this seemed like a good get for the Marlins on paper. The only problem with Randolph? The Marlins were concerned about his health, as after the trade happened, Randolph missed 6 weeks of the AAA season with an injury. And this left the Marlins in a pickle, because of the two players to be named later, one of them was now in Pittsburgh, and the other one had injury concerns. The D-backs argued that, wait a second, Randolph was perfectly healthy. He was healthy when the season ended. And for Tucson's final game of the season, guess who was on the mound and pitching? That's right, Steven Randolph. However, the Marlins weren't biting and refused to accept Randolph in the Matt Mantei trade, thinking that he was not as healthy as the D-backs led on. Seeing as after he spent 6.5 weeks on the DL, in 9 starts, he went 0-5 with a 6.03 ERA, which was not even close to the same guy that he was over the first half of the season, when his ERA was below 3. They wanted a new player, one who was healthier and deemed better, and wanted none other than 19-year-old Abraham Nunez, who has no relation to Vladimir Nunez, as in another player that was part of this convoluted trade. Now, all newspapers said at the time that Nunez was 19 years old, but Baseball Reference had him at 22 years old. So this might be one of those cases of not knowing the guy's birthday. However, the point is that Nunez was a rising star in the D-backs farm system. In high A ball, he stole 40 bases for the High Desert Mavericks, which was the most on the team. He had power, hitting 22 home runs. He got on base 38% of the time. He was considered a true 5-tool prospect with his incredible speed, his incredible fielding, where he led the California League with 20 outfield assists, and his power. And understandably, the Diamondbacks wanted to do everything in their power to hold on to him and not include him in that trade for Mantei, since Baseball America had him as their number 1 prospect and as the number 30 prospect in all of the minors. In their words, we agreed on a player to be named later. That player was healthy enough to finish the season. You can't just take back the trade agreement now. And the argument between the teams got so heated that it eventually wound up in Commissioner Bud Selig's office. By this point, it was February 2000, as in, the next season was about to start, and we didn't know whether the final piece of the puzzle, Abraham Nunez, was going to be a Diamondback or a Marlin. The Diamondbacks were confident that Nunez would be returned to them, since they wouldn't have made the trade if they had to include Nunez in the first place, while the Marlins were confident that they'd be able to keep Nunez. So much so that Nunez worked with the Marlins Academy in the Dominican Republic and even met with manager John Bowles. Said Jerry Colangelo, the managing general partner of the Diamondbacks, "This is still an open issue. We'll present our case, because we feel harmed in this situation. We have sought some relief. However, after a ton of deliberation, on March 18th, in the middle of spring training, and more than 7 months after the initial trade was agreed upon, Selig finally made his ruling. The verdict? The Diamondbacks had to include Nunez in the trade. Selig hoped that the teams could have come to an agreement, even asking the Marlins to send someone else to the D-backs to make the trade more even. But when the teams couldn't come to an agreement, Selig said that Nunez was a Marlin, and that was that. He believed that both teams acted in good faith, but seeing as the Diamondbacks admitted that Randolph had a strained UCL, even though they said it wasn't serious, that was enough for the Marlins to stake a claim to Nunez. As Dombrowski said, "We liked Randolph. That was a guy at the time in July we were thrilled to be receiving. However, we just didn't see him as the same guy after the injury. We didn't see the same breaking ball and all that. Those are important considerations." And so, the trade that was supposed to be completed by October 15th was completed 5 months later. And just to show you how much of a crapshoot it is to trade for prospects, all of this hoopla for Abraham Nunez was over a guy that hit 160 for the Marlins, made just 92 plate appearances for the team, and only played 136 games in the majors before never playing in the majors again after 2004. You would think that the D-backs just gave up the next Vladimir Guerrero or Andrew Jones, instead of a guy that ended up hitting below the Mendoza line with the Marlins. But to say that the trade to acquire the man you've been watching this whole time, Matt Mantei, was bizarre would be putting it lightly. The teams agreed on a trade, then didn't agree on the same trade, then had to get the commissioner involved to make a ruling before the start of the 2000 season, even though the trade happened in the middle of 1999. It's crazy how with all the trades the Diamondbacks have made over their short 25-year history, the one that caused the most chaos wasn't even for a specific player. Rather, it was for a player to be named later. And if you want to learn more about the history of the D-backs and other strange things to happen in their franchise's history, well, that's for a video to be named later. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.